This video is sponsored by Skillshare. Thanks so much for helping out our channel.
Hello guys, this is Svetlana from INSANE Cosplay, and yes, your eyes are not tricking you. It's not just a weird dream, this is the reality. This is the second part of my demonic Brigitte making of video. The video like so many of you actually asked for, and now it's here. So, in my very first part, I said that I hope that this one won't take another 8 months to upload, and I was correct. It took me actually 9 months. I'm not really good at time management, but who cares? The costume is done. And now I'm actually very excited to show you the rest of the whole making of. So I'm going to show you how I did the shoe armor, the leg armor, the fabric part, a huge part of the attachment, how I did the wig, the cute horns, the makeup, and like all the missing things. And at the end of this video, you will see demonic Brigitte in all its glory, completely finished, done, and super epic. So, after 1.5 years of intense crafting, this costume is finally done, and I cannot wait to show you everything. Well, and if you have no idea what I'm talking about, because I tend to be quite confusing sometimes, demonic Brigitte is actually a custom design drawn by the amazing Zach Fisher. And yeah, Zach Fisher is actually an illustrator, and after doing quite some Monster Hunter armor, I finally wanted to do something really big, something really epic, and especially something unique. So I asked him to pick Brigitte from Overwatch and give her some Diablo 3 inspired armor, and this was the result. And now, in this first and also second video right now, I'm going to show you how I basically made the whole costume from scratch. And if you really want to be up to date on this whole project, I actually already made 4 videos in total. So I made a video about how I planned the whole project, how I made the mace, how I made the shield, and as I mentioned already, how I made the first part of the armor. So have fun watching all of them. And if you want to make some epic armor and cool costumes as well yourself, check out my foam armor book on INSANECosplay.com. It's full of tutorials and tips and tricks on how to get started. It shows you how to work with EVA foam, how to cut it, how to shape it, how to prime it, how to paint it, and everything you need to know on how to get started. On INSANECosplay.com, buy my books, and now let's start with the video.
So I actually ended part 1 with having most of the top of the costume done. As you can see, the breastplate, the shoulders, as well as the hip plates were completely finished. Just check out the first video again if you're curious about how I made all these parts. Well, and in the second video, we are going to start with the shin guards. As always, I needed a base pattern here. Luckily, I already had some I previously made for another costume, my Banuk Trailblazer outfit from Horizon Zero Dawn, which is yet another costume I still have to finish. So anyway, I traced those shapes on thicker paper and adjusted them afterwards. As you can see, I added some additional material here to make the armor wider. Afterwards, I cut all parts out and then traced them to 10mm thick EVA foam. I just had to connect all 4 sides and then close the back. Now you surely wonder what glue I used, right? This was contact cement, which I filled into this little squeeze bottle. As always, you will find links for all tools and materials I used in this video in the video description. Also, please check out my website for a list of links to my favorite crafting shops. Next, it was time to make patterns for the details. Here I used painter's tape and simply drew on all shapes I needed directly onto my leg armor. This way I could instantly see how everything would turn out later. Once I cut these out, I also made some additional patterns on paper. And these here were all the elements after I traced the shapes onto EVA foam. A few of them also got additional foam bubbles around the edges. I have them pre-cut in different sizes, and they're super handy for all kinds of costumes. Then I also attached this front piece. So this was the base. Next I added additional 5mm foam for the leather belts. I obviously could use real leather as well, but I like to keep things simple and use foam for everything instead. Yeah, I'm lazy. As you can see, I used foam bevels for plenty of details here as well. They're just perfect to create these raised lines really fast and easy. Next, I began creating the base for the backside. Here I had to sculpt a bird feet-like detail. I'm really not sure what Zach was thinking when he made this piece. Maybe Brigitte had an epic battle with a wild chicken. Anyway, I wanted to use foam clay for this part. After applying some water, I placed thick clay sausages directly onto the foam. Afterwards, I added some claws and did a little bit of sculpting. To be honest with you though, I wasn't happy with the result at all. So I got rid of the foam and decided to start all over again. Looks cute though, and it reminds me of something. Well, I did a fresh start, but created the foam clay base quite similar. This time though, I sculpted each scale individually and applied it onto the chicken leg. It took me quite a while to finish everything, but now I was really happy with the result. The next part required a little bit more sculpting. As you can see, foam clay sticks perfectly to wet foam, so always use enough water. I worked here super rough and just added some additional teeth afterwards. Once dried, I glued on the whole piece with contact cement. As you can see, the surface teared up a bit, but I filled the gaps easily with some extra clay. Afterwards, it was time to add some final details. For elements that required a lot of sanding, I actually prefer to use high density foam. This piece here was completely sculpted with my Dremel. So once I finished the base, I glued it already curved onto 5mm foam and then cut the middle out. I also added extra foam clay sausages and shaped out the demon mouth this way. Last but not least, I placed plenty of cute teeth all around and made sure this piece fits nicely onto the leg armor. So far so good for the leg. Now for the shoe armor. I simply grabbed the same shoes I always use for my costumes and made a duct tape pattern. I traced the shape onto EVA foam and sanded in deep cuts with my Dremel. As you can see, I used here two pieces, sanded down the inside as well, and attached then some foam cloth. Once done, I connected both parts while they were curved. This way, this element kept its round shape and I could easily attach the shoe plate at the front. And here was the result of this costume piece so far. A little fitting test. Looked good. Next came the priming. Just like I did for the upper armor, I used 3 layers of flex bond here. Then it was time to airbrush everything. Benny first covered the whole surface in sandy brown, did then the silver parts, and finally the reddish bird claw. Then I used frog tape to cover everything up afterwards. This work step actually took forever. Following that, Benny painted the bone section and added some shadows here as well. Well, and then I had to apply more tape. This is actually how the leg armor looked at this point. Afterwards, it was finally time to paint everything in a dark red. Benny also added darker shadows around the edges. Getting rid of all the tape really felt magical. I ripped it off and got some nicely painted bird legs underneath. The second layer of tape released also some silver parts. This step is always the best. And here was a cute jaw hidden. Once I carefully got rid of all the tape and freed the teeth, I got a great base paint job as a result. Then I had to use the brush for the rest. I had to paint all these bevels with a bright gold. But while this color looks quite covering in the video, I actually needed 3 layers to get rid of all the spotty flaws. My brown was also not super covering, so doing the leather belts took quite a while as well. I also used wax paint to improve the golden edges. To create sharp lines on the silver elements, I used thin masking tape. This is actually the back of the costume and no one will see it anyway, but oh well. So, the gold looked already quite nice and the silver as well. Then Benny painted the birdie claws and fixed the messy edges of my golden paint job. He also gave the silver elements some bright highlights and finished these very last details with more silver and his super fine lines. He really has steady hands. Wow, this looked already so much better. Now I covered everything with satin spray varnish. Do you see how the colors instantly pop? I love this effect. Here it is really important that the varnish is super covering. This way the armor got prepared for the next step, oil washing. I just applied some thinned out oil paints all over the bony part. Once done, I wiped most of it away with some brush cleaner. The result was that the paint stayed only within the deeper, textured areas. This technique really made a huge difference, don't you think? Afterwards, I added some last darker highlights with a simple brush. And the teeth got some extra treatment as well. This painting trick also worked great for the chicken legs. Bokok! After covering up the whole area, I wiped most of the paint away. Also, you might have missed the cute little mouth. Benny and I actually painted this one separately. Everything was just far less complicated this way. I could easily glue in the translucent and already painted LED foam. And with a little bit of extra contact cement, I also placed the pre-soldered LED strips to the inside. Next, I made sure everything still worked together and marked where I would need to place the cute baby demon mouth. Now, this part was actually quite painful. I had to make some space for the additional piece and had to cut out a huge part of foam from the leg armor. Wow, I actually was really not sure if this would work out. And Benny was freaking out. But hey, it looked good. So I added more glue onto the foam and the inside of the demon mouth, pulled the LED plug through a hole and carefully placed this thing onto the leg armor. Wow, this was exciting! And as you can see, I not only finished the second armor piece as well, but they also even turned out symmetrical! Whoop whoop! Next, I had to finish the shoe armor. Just like the leg, I also primed it with Flex Bond. Well, and you already know the drill for the rest. Benny first painted the silver areas, which were already taped off in the scene. And once he finished the brown as well, I got rid of the tape and found some lovely silver armor underneath. For the attachment, I spread some hot glue to the inside and put here a small metal D-ring. Same on the other side. In addition, I also sewed these 4 leather belts, which were held together with Velcro tape. I placed the belt under my shoe, set the armor piece to the right position and filled the gap with more hot glue. Last but not least, for the fabric wraps around the legs, I grabbed a stretchy 4 leather, cut out a few stripes, and then after all of these steps, this was the result. I love how bulky the leg armor turned out. Next, it's time for the bracers. As always, I used the duct tape pattern as my base. I traced the shape onto paper and began adjusting it to my needs. As you can see, I made it far longer and also a lot more curved. This was the cutout template. I used here 10mm EVA foam as well, since I wanted to make the bracers really bulky. So once I cut out the shape, I heated up the material with my heat gun and rolled it like a croissant. Damn, I'm getting hungry now. Then I covered the edges with contact cement and surprise! I actually cut out 2 of these bracer pieces. I connected both of them super carefully along the edges and with that they already made a nicely bulky shape. Closing the last seam was a bit tricky though. After the first fitting test, however, I noticed that the bracer turned out a tiny bit too wide. So I cut open the whole thing again, placed a new edge along the border, but also adjusted the patterns at the same time. Then I got rid of the extra material and tried it again. As you might have noticed, I experimented a lot here, but this is how I always create my costumes. Oh, this version already looked much better. Now I only added a further strip to make the bracers a little bit longer. For the next part I already prepared some more patterns. Those were really simple though. I used them for additional layers as well. Well, and this is how they look traced onto EVA foam. As always, I used black foam for the base armor and grey foam for pieces that needed to be Dremelled. I also glued these together already curved. That way they would keep the shape and I wouldn't need to use a heat gun again. This part actually went to the back of the bracer. Now to the next pattern pieces. These were again traced to black and grey EVA foam. And here is how they looked after I sanded them. I already showed a lot of Dremelling in my first making of video, so I apologize if I keep these work steps short here. As you can see though, the process is always quite similar. After gluing on this part as well, I finished the edge with a thicker foam bevel. I only had to cut the ends into shape and glue them on afterwards. Now Brigitte has these really massive hands. To make mine look a little bit bigger, I bought some huge biker gloves. I got rid of the belts around the wrists with a few cuts, and voila, my hands looked already much bigger. Now I only attached some spikes to the back of the bracer, burned in stitching holes into the foam leather belts, and the building part of this armor piece was done as well. Next, the upper arm guard. It began with a simple paper pattern as well. Again, I used 10mm black EVA foam and connected both edges with contact cement. This was a pretty simple base. For the following step, I just stacked additional 5mm pieces on top of each other. See, super easy, super basic, but the result looked already quite nice. Then I added foam bevels and belts and burned in fake stitching holes into the foam. Well, and then this part was done as well. Oh, and by the way, you can find this pattern as well as plenty of others I used for my Brigitte cosplay in the pattern section of our shop. They are spread over different pattern collections, however, since I used this project to create plenty of different basic shapes. Now let's speed up the painting part a bit. Benny and I worked here again with a good amount of masking tape to combine plenty of different colors. While this is surely an extra step, it allowed us to apply nice gradients and especially use very well covering airbrush paint. Just the red gave us some trouble. I applied around 5 layers here until I was happy with the result. As you can see though, working with the airbrush is always super fast and allows you to add really nice gradients and shadows. Once done, it was time to peel off the tape again. I also kept recycling the thinner tape to apply some additional and sharp edges onto the silver elements. The result was that these parts look now far more sharp and crisp. Loved it! Next, I had to paint the golden edges. This is actually one of my more covering gold paints. However, it turned out a little bit too shiny, so I dimmed it down with antique gold wax paint. Ah, this was much better. Then a little bit of silver for the buckles and some quickly dabbed on shadows. Benny did most of the smaller details and the finishing work, but I did a lot of base painting, taping and just prep work. We are a pretty good team. Finally, I covered the whole bracer in satin spray varnish and this was the result. I think it turned out pretty nice. Also, here is the upper arm by the way. Now to the other bracer. This one is almost completely covered in leather. I used my already existing pattern and traced it this time to faux leather and some extra fabric. I sewed 2 mirrored parts together, stacked both of them over each other and secured the edges with sewing clips. Then I sewed along the edges, turned the whole thing inside out and flattened this piece with a final seam all around. Afterwards, I also added some decorative stitches on top. Looked good so far. Now for the next part, I needed a further pattern. As you can see, I mostly work freestyle. My material of choice for the silver edge on top was this thick vinyl. I traced the shape onto the material and then made some marks on my leather part as well. Benny used these lines as a guide and airbrushed on some shadows with fabric color. I know it looks weird at this point, but wait for the next steps. Now I finally clamped the edges together and closed the fabric bracer with a final seam. At the end though, I decided to use a thinner and less shiny vinyl for the silver part. To keep the thickness, I applied some fabric glue and placed a 3mm thick foam piece into the middle. Then I folded the excess material over the edge, one flap at a time. Oh, and here is Midna in case you are missing some corgis in this video so far. Once the silver part was done, I attached it with more glue directly onto the fabric bracer. So this was the result. Next, I had to cut out these little golden ornaments. This step was super tedious and I needed a lot of them. Once done, I simply glued these on with fabric glue as well. At this point, I noticed that the silver edges in the reference all had a bright brim. So it was time for some paint again. After taping off the edge of the silver part, Benny airbrushed some metallic black all over it. Then, once I got rid of the tape again, I got this lovely edge. I only had to heat seal it with my iron. Well, and here you can finally see the actual foam bracer I already built before. This one needed to be combined with the fabric cover though. However, it was a little bit too tight at the bottom. So I had to get rid of some foam again. And to be honest with you, I was so deep into my crafting zone that I totally forgot that this part would be actually covered with fabric again later. So yeah, Benny had already painted it all, but I had to destroy it all again. This was really painful. But oh well, whatever. After that, I covered the foam with some contact cement and just slid over the leather part. Fit like a glove. For the metal silver rings that would come around it, I grabbed a strip of foam and then glued it to the right length. Yep, this would work out. Afterwards, I only finished these pieces with some details and a bit of battle damage. Well, and whoop-de-whoop, these were the finished rings. Now I only glued them on with more contact cement and the bracer was done as well. Yay! To finish the gloves, I also had to cut out a few additional pieces. I made little triangles out of 5mm foam, glued them to pyramids and also cut out these base plates. Then some sanding work all around the edges and contact cement here and there. These were then simply primed and painted. In addition, I also sewed a little fabric patch which I glued directly onto the leather glove. I used fabric glue here, by the way. It also worked great to attach the foam spikes onto the material. The other glove also got some pyramids and a nice demon claw thingy on top. Ta-da! Now both of my bracers plus the 2 gloves were done. I really love how these turned out. So cool! So, do you feel already motivated to start crafting yourself? Well, Emma Gannon, a best-selling writer, business owner and popular podcaster might give you some inspiration. Her course, Discovering Success on Skillshare, might be just what you need to find the motivation you seek. In her class, she shows some very simple and easy to follow exercises to figure out what's really important for you, determine meaningful projects, and what drives you every day. After watching her, I really thought about what I want to reach in my own life, like grow my business, learn new skills, and work on my crafting passion. And I'm sure her course can help you as well. Other than that, Skillshare is a great online learning community full of inspiring classes for creative and curious people just like you and me. It offers countless classes on illustration, design, photography, video editing, lifestyle, productivity, and so much more. The first 1,000 people to use the link in my description will get a free trial of Skillshare Premium membership. So hurry up and check out all these helpful classes. Thanks again to Skillshare for sponsoring this video. Now let's continue. Now we're coming to the cloak around the hip area. To create a pattern, I used some cheap old linen, which I roughly cut into shape. I placed it onto the costume, checked if the template would work, and after I was happy, I traced it onto shiny red curtain fabric. Afterwards, I did a little bit of sewing, and as you can see, I actually added a second layer to the back, which I then turned inside out. With this extra lining, I just wanted to add a nice contrast to the costume. Next, I had to flatten out the edges with another seam all around. So far so good, everything looked nice and clean. I also placed additional seams in the middle of the shape, since the heavy curtain fabric would otherwise get ugly folds at the bottom from its weight. For the silver brim, I had to trace the shape onto 3mm EVA foam. But since I was working on the floor, which is a very easy target for my dogs, they assumed it was cuddle time. Zelda and Midna were very eager to lick my face. Really, try to finish some work under these conditions. Okay, they were still really cute though. Well, as you can see, I basically just traced the shape of the hip coat and set a further line for the silver edge. Midna and Zelda still didn't want to give up, so I had to improvise. Then I also traced the shape onto my vinyl, all around the whole hip coat. This time though, I used contact cement to connect the foam with the fabric. The result was just smoother and easier to handle. See, looks really nice, right? For the next step, Benny darkened the edges with his airbrush again. I don't have video footage for that, but you'll see it later for a different part. Then I directly glued on the foam vinyl piece using my favorite fabric glue. It's pretty reliable even with heavy fabrics and dries out transparent, which is a big plus. It also worked perfectly to apply my cut-out golden trim. Took me forever to cut out so much of it though. Meanwhile, little Midna waited patiently for more attention. So, and this is how the hip coat turned out so far. Almost done. Next, I spread a massive amount of fabric glue onto the ends and folded the fabric here together. I wanted to make some fake wrinkles so the fabric would look less plain and boring. Once dried, I also cut off the end. You'll see later why. Well, and then I taped off the edge here as well, so Benny could apply a nice dark gradient with his airbrush. After peeling off the tape, I got a nice bright brim along the silver part, just like in the reference. And once done, I attached the whole coat with some simple Velcro tape to the inside of the hip armor. Next, let me show you super quickly how I did this cool sash next. I grabbed some leftover fabric and cut out a rough dummy which I tested on my costume. Then I repeated the same steps as for the hip cloak and ended up with this version. I simply glued on some silver edges and golden trims and then applied more glue to make fake wrinkles. To attach it, I hot glued a Velcro strip to the backside of my emblem. Another piece also went to the back of the breastplate. Then the counterparts went to both sides of the sash. Easy! I think it turned out really pretty. The next fabric part required was the loin cloth. Again, I began with 2 layers of fabric. These were first clamped together and then connected along the edges. I turned it inside out, placed more clamps, and flattened the fabric out with a final seam all around. Ta-da! And here you see Benny's fabric painting as promised. He simply used dark fabric color and followed the lines to add more shadows to the red curtain fabric. I think this makes the piece already much more interesting. Next, I had to glue on some golden stripes. Now with the airbrush gradient underneath, this created a really nice contrast. Also for the attachments, I sewed on Velcro onto the back. The counterparts got some hot glue and were then attached directly onto the breastplate. To avoid any loose edges, I secured them with additional hot glue all around. And this is how it holds in place. Finally, I also added more Velcro onto the front and 2 huge eyelets. So to connect everything, I first had to attach the loin cloth. Then I placed the hip cloak at the front. The next layer was the massive belt piece. However, I had to pull the wires for the LEDs through the eyelets first, and then mount the belt onto the Velcro on the breastplate. Then I closed the back and attached the hip armor plates. The other side of the cloak went underneath. And yeah, here were the shoes. So, and this was how the whole costume looked mounted onto my mannequin. Man, these sure were a lot of armor pieces already. But yeah, I was still not done. Okay, now only one part of the costume was missing, the wig. The base I used was a Virginia classic from Arda Wigs in plum color. It had a great quality and this perfect hairline fitting for Brigitte. To create a ponytail, I first grabbed a scrap of wobbler, folded it together and separated it into 2 strips. I shaped a cross and attached a PVC pipe to it in a 90-degree angle. Then I let this piece cool down at the back of my wig head. Next, I grabbed some 2 cm thick EVA foam and cut out 4 large squares. I cut a long gap into 2 parts and applied contact cement all around. You're probably super curious what I need the EVA foam for at this point, right? Just keep on watching. So, this was the roughly carved foam at the end. Then I pulled the wig over the wobbler cross and made sure the PVC pipe stuck out at the right place. Well, and here went the foam block. Boom! A base for the ponytail. To cover it in hair next, I needed extra wefts. I separated them more or less carefully, applied some hot glue onto the foam and began attaching weft by weft onto it. This looked actually super messy, but the result turned out quite clean, I would say. Now I could easily slip over the foam hair ball onto the PVC pipe and got a ponytail. I got this tip from Kinpatsu Cosplay. Check out her amazing ponytail tutorial on her YouTube channel. It was a huge help to create the base of my wig. Well, next I had to do quite some styling. After shortening the length of the ponytail, I also began thinning out the rest from the bottom. I should probably mention here that I seriously have no idea about wig styling and I just hoped I would not completely mess up this part. Then I added a good amount of hot glue into the foam hole and permanently attached the ponytail onto the wig. So this was the progress so far. I think I actually did okay. For the puffy part at the top, I started teasing some sections of the hair. I never did this before and seriously hoped I wouldn't need to buy a second wig. gosh, I had no idea what I was doing and everything looked super messy. Then I brushed the pretty top hair over the ugly messy hair and tried to hide the chaos with a lot of hairspray. Sadly, I noticed that I had too few hair sections left at the front, so I glued in some more wefts with fabric glue. Was this enough? Was this too much? I had no idea. Okay, but I kept on stacking the hair, spraying like crazy, and just hoped for the very best. And while this might look good to you now, it was actually my 4th attempt to hide the mess properly, by the way. After I was finally kind of satisfied, I began shortening the rest of the wig. A steamer is a great tool to quickly make the hair nice and flat. Some more cutting here and there, more steam. Last but not least, I released the long bangs, did a little bit of brushing, and I think it turned out good. I think so, yay! Next, the hair Brooche. As you already know, everything starts with a pattern. I cut it out and traced it this time onto white wobbler. 2 symmetrical pieces were then cut out and got connected with heat in the middle. Then I placed some simple markings and glued on a bunch of single LEDs. They also got soldered together, of course, which took me a while, but hey, of course, the silly hair Brooche had to light up as well. Ah! Afterwards, I covered the whole thing with translucent LED foam and added some foam clay sausages on top. Here I did some fast sculpting work and then added some spikes to the end. A few layers of flex bond for priming, and I finally could paint the Brooche super quick. So here was the result. As you can see, the plug is on the back and I glued on a thick cord for the attachment. Now for the horns. Benny first built me a simple 3D model in Blender. He printed out the patterns for me and I traced it piece by piece onto 5mm EVA foam. Then I cut out all of them. As you can see, many parts required an angled cut here. This way I was able to create a nice pointy shape when gluing this foam puzzle together. I connected them piece by piece, pressed the edges together along the seams, and got my first horn this way. Afterwards, I covered my 3D printed head dummy with duct tape and drew on the shape for the rest of this costume piece. This one then got traced onto 10mm high density EVA foam and sanded into shape with my Dremel. The horns also got a nice texture and the grey base was completely reshaped as well with my heat gun. Next, I glued on the horn and made sure both sides turned out symmetrical. For the paint job, I just repeated all the previous techniques you've already seen before. I did some taping and airbrushing and finally some oil washing. And this was the finished paint job. Super quick. Finally, in my race to the finish line, I added some hot glue, a strong magnet, and a fabric cover to secure it. Then I made this magnet belt thing in addition. I actually had it laying around from an old costume and thought, hey, this could be also useful for further projects. I covered these magnets as well with some extra fabric, added Velcro to the ends, and now I was able to easily attach the horns with some magnet magic directly onto my head. Pretty useful, right? Then, to finish it all off, I trimmed the lace front of my wig, attached the hair Brooche, and this was how the whole head part looked like. I was really excited that it turned out so good. So, the wig was done. The costume was done. And it was time for a very first fitting test. Ooh! I felt really mighty. My movement was obviously quite limited, like this was the maximum I could bend forward. And wearing the costume wasn't really comfy, but I looked epic, and this was all that mattered. I also think the fabric part turned out really nice. I just loved the texture of the material and especially also the gradients that Benny airbrushed on earlier. And here is the costume with all the lights on. Ah! Yeah, I know, you shouldn't pat yourself on the back, but I was really proud. Now, finally, I had to do the makeup. And like, my makeup skills aren't great. But I think the result looked okay. Then I added the wig, finished the edges with more color, Kiyomi Aqua Cream by the way, and attached my super cute demon horns. Roar, sexy! Well, and here was the final costume with the wig and makeup this time. In the background, you can already see the setup for our photo shoot. So here is a little bit more video footage of the costume in action. Even though I was not 100% satisfied with the result, I was still absolutely proud that Benny and I managed to finish it over 1.5 years of very intense work. And here is the first properly edited photo. More photos will follow, of course, so make sure to check out my social media channel for more epic, demonic Brigitte stuff. Again, thanks so much to Zach Fisher for this super inspiring costume design. It was so much fun and an amazing adventure to bring this insane project to life.
Thanks for watching! You finally reached the end of this video, and yeah, so you can consider yourself actually a super fan because this was the longest video I've ever uploaded, but I hope it showed you that this progress and like the whole costume was very intense. It was a lot of work, it was a lot of time, and yeah, it cost me also a lot of nerves to finish Demonic Brigitte, but I'm very proud I made it, and made it with Benny, and like especially made it with you, because you know, like I was like so many times I had like so many doubts, and I was really not sure if I can still finish it, because like everything was like so big and like there was still so much work left and everything. But you guys kept me driving, like you constantly asked, you know, like where's Demonic Brigitte, when will you finish it, we want to see more, and like you were so inspiring, and like you gave me so much inspiration and motivation, so I just wanted to say thank you for all your support, like, you know, like for all your poking, like finish it. So thanks so much. You were a huge help here to keep me motivated. Yeah, and yeah, and other than that, this is actually not the last video I will upload about this costume. I actually wanted to do a second video where I talk a little bit more about, you know, like all the attachments, how all the LEDs work, how all the electronics work and everything. And just go a little bit more into detail how the whole project and like how this whole thing was a crazy and very intense adventure for me and Benny. And yeah, until then, if you have any questions, like any feedback or anything, just as always write me a comment down below. And if you have no questions or feedback or anything to write, just write down Corgi and join the Corgi squad and support us with the YouTube algorithm. And as always, like and subscribe, hit the notification bell, consider to support us on Patreon so we can make more videos, which are hopefully not as long as this one though. And yeah, and don't forget to buy my books on comicosplay.com. And now, bye bye. and see you very soon, maybe with the next Brigitte video.